over the years, I've gotten used to DS's pulling fast ones on you. And of course, doubly so with Steve. He's just a tremendous man. Open your Bibles up to James. I'm a 12-hour drive today, and he calls me, and I'm on my way here, and he says, hey, we're going to do these videos. And I was thinking to myself, man, that's kind of a neat idea. I really thought that. Then after we hung up, I was thinking, wow, I should have asked him what tonight's about. And then we get here, and I'm listening to him talk about it, and I don't know. I say these kind of things, and you wonder if people buy into if what you're really saying is from your heart, or if they think it's just preacher stuff. But it's just so hand in hand with what we're looking at tonight out of the Word, which is so neat that two irresponsible guys didn't plan this. That God just kind of orchestrated this thing. I've spent the last year becoming acclimated to a congregation that I get to see on a regular basis, and kind of transitioning into a co-pastor position, kind of. And it's one thing, I've had a unique perspective over the years traveling across the country, but it's an entirely different thing when you get to see the same people week after week after week after week. Because they can't lie to you. And you can't lie to them. And what I take away from this video, and I hope you can see what I saw in this video, at least for the purposes for this evening, is that this was a heart movement in them. And one of the things we're needing, I know we're needing in our congregation back in Tennessee, but one of the things we're needing in this day and age is not, see, you can't guilt trip people into ministry. And there's this need that arises from time to time, at least from our pulpit, where we need help, and it seems like the staff and 2 or 3 families are the only ones doing anything. And we just don't like guilt tripping at our church. And I'm absolutely convinced that what is at stake, at least in our church, and what we're seeing consistently, and not with everybody, but from people that aren't involved, it's not that they're bad or evil, there's something missing here. That's all over that video. I mean, there was a movement of God on their heart. I mean, that was so plain. They said, we've got to respond. That's drastic. I know, let's sell the farm. You know? That's incredible. Now, hey, God may call you to do that. Thank God I don't have a farm. But God may call you to do that tonight. But I honestly, I think it's a lot simpler. I want to walk with you this evening through the somewhat of the first chapter of James, and we really want to get to our goal, which is in chapter 2, but you really have to become acclimated somewhat to what James has laid out for us in this first chapter. So I want to give you a couple messages and kind of get you started with this whole thing. When you come into the first chapter, it basically serves as an introduction, and the first 18 verses is the first half of the introduction, and from 19 through verse 27 is the last half. So you have your Bibles open, this would be helpful. The first half of the introduction, what James does is he establishes the message. From verse 19 through 27, the last half, he talks about how we are transformed by that message. Hear this. The first half is the message. Not a message that you implement, not a message that you aspire to, okay? But a message from verses 19 through 27 that transforms the very person that you are. What's tremendous, and man, I got a hold of this, or it got a hold of me the moment I got saved, is that I could be a different person. And maybe you've never been kind of maybe where I've been, where I came from, my own personal story. But when I got saved, my whole deal was I just got tired of being me. I didn't like me. I mean, I didn't want to be me anymore. And what was so staggering about Christianity is that not to just live a different lifestyle, but that I could be a different individual. And when I read the Bible for the very first time in 1995, that's what really grabbed a hold of me, is that I could be different. So we look at these first 18 verses, and of course then tomorrow night we're going to look at verses 19 to 27, at least a passage out of each. again, we're not talking about a to-do list. We're talking about the kind of person that God wants to mold us into. He wants to change us. A little bit about the author of James, which is really important for us, is this message comes from just a really unique individual. James is not a disciple. He's the half brother of Jesus, one of many. You don't really hear much of him in the Gospels. What you do hear from verses or from chapters places like John chapter 7 is Jesus doesn't have a real good relationship with his brothers. At least they seem to be. It's very plain that they're on different pages. There's times when his family and mother and brothers and the whole deal shows up, and Jesus doesn't even come out to see him. And again in John 7, he gets in this huge argument with his brothers, and he basically says, "Listen, I'm not like you guys. I don't think like you guys. I don't live like you guys. I mean, you don't even understand me." James is a part of that group, which is really intriguing. Now we know from Paul that James was one of the guys that Jesus appeared to after his death. I mean, Jesus appeared to all kinds of people, but he appeared in person and face to face with James and we don't know really what he talked about, but obviously we see the effects of that and God's movement upon this guy's life. James ends up becoming just a tremendous figure in the early church. You read in the kind of the early chapters of Acts, or maybe the middle chapters, probably better to describe it, chapters 13, 14, and 15. James is the head of the Jerusalem council. He's the one that's transitioning the Jewish church into a Gentile church. We know that after the temple was destroyed, the church center of gravity is the Gentile world, not the Jewish world. James was instrumental in that. He was also, even before that, he's pastor of the church in Jerusalem, which is the largest and most influential church on the face of the planet. So this guy is huge. In fact, if you look at verse 1, this is so neat. Let's look at this. If you look at verse 1, after he introduces himself, he lists the recipients of this letter. And he says, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So even though James is a pastor and pastor of the Jerusalem church, he's not writing this letter to his church. He's writing this letter to the global church of his day. Now, if you could imagine what it was like, think about this. If you could imagine what it was like in this day and time to have a global voice, that's astounding. I mean, it's not terribly difficult in our day and age. You can just get on YouTube and make a fool of yourself and you got a shot. I mean, seriously. I mean, this is a couple years before YouTube, before Twitter. And yet this guy has such a platform. If you can imagine this guy has such a platform that God has afforded him a global voice in his hour, that he writes a letter that finds itself in Scripture, addressing the global church of his day. By the way, also, this is one of the first letters written in our New Testament, even before Paul's letters. Okay? So James is extremely, extremely significant. And what he does when he writes this letter, again, first 18 verses, he lays out the message of the gospel. This is so helpful. This summer, I've done more non-Nazarene camps than I've done Nazarene camps. I've done Free Methodist, Missionary, Wesleyan, all these different camps. And when you come in as one group called me a charismatic Nazarene. I don't know what they meant by that. But, I mean, I understood after I got there. But, I mean, they were really, which is why they had me, of course. But, what's really helpful when I speak is that, hey, I'm not appealing to you to embrace my words or my perspective, or I've got some spiel for you. You can believe whatever you want to believe. I mean, you're grown adults. I'm not your pastor. Thank God. You can believe whatever you want to believe. But you would think, and I want you to embrace this thing so bad. You would think if you're in love with Jesus, if you bear the name believer, Christian, you would listen to what this guy says. Because he writes the global church of his day and says, this is the message. This is not my take on the message. This is not my opinion about the message. I want to walk you through it. We can't get through all 18 verses. Pastor said I've got to have you out of here by 10:30, so we're going to have to really kind of walk briskly through this. But if I could give you just a small piece of this tonight, And in fact, we want to walk through verses 16, 17, and 18 this evening as kind of a looking at the climactic statement of this message. You're gonna find out the emphasis of what James is talking about here. It's really, really significant. Verses 16, 17, and 18. Let's look at it together. He begins in verse 16, and he says this statement, "Don't be deceived, my dear brethren." The word there that we translate deceived can be deceiving. It doesn't mean deceived in kind of like the snake deceiving Eve deception. It's not like this evil Gargamel hiding behind bushes, eating Smurfs kind of deception. Okay? There's that kind of deception out there. This deception literally means to be led astray. In fact, a great translation of this word is distracted. The perfect illustration of this term happened, and this has happened several times, but it was hysterical. I was home a couple weeks ago. I was just home for like 3 or 4 days. Summers are crazy. And by the time I got home, the house is tore up, so I've got to fix stuff. And part of the fixing was in my wife's closet where my kids were swinging on the shelves, which is apparently natural. And so one of the shelves was broken, so I was fixing that when I was home. And I'm under there and I'm working and it's dark, and the light's not reaching, and I'm getting ready to leave. I'm holding the shelf up. I can't really see. I'm trying, 40, I'm losing my sight. So I'm trying to get this screw back in the wall. And my son comes running by out of our bathroom. And I said, "CJ!" And he popped back over there. And I said, "Hey, right around the corner, if you go, literally, it's like 20 feet. If you go around the corner in our kitchen, we have a junk drawer. You have a junk drawer? It's hard to say quickly. We have a junk drawer. And in our junk drawer, there's a flashlight. I said, "Hey, run into the junk drawer and grab the flashlight." He's like, "Okay." And he takes off, and he never comes back. Okay? And so I'm in there like 5 minutes, and I'm finally yelling, "CJ!" And so he runs back in there and he says, "Yeah, Dad, what do you need?" I was like, "I need you to get the flashlight." He's like, "Oh, sorry, I forgot." Okay? He's like 10, and I was like, "You forgot? It's like 20 feet, dude." So he runs in. He got led astray. From the 20 feet, somewhere between there and the junk drawer, he got led astray. He got distracted. That's this word. Now listen to this. This is huge. James is writing. This is the climactic statement of the message. Are you with me? James is writing to the global church of his day, and he writes to them saying, listen, don't get distracted. Now, when I first studied this, it's been some time ago now, but when I first studied this, it radically kind of revamped my understanding of the early church. Because this is 25 years after the death of Jesus. People that were healed by Jesus are still walking around. Lazarus probably, he hadn't even keeled over yet again. And so, he's still walked. People have been healed and saw the disciples. They've probably even heard Jesus speak and at least saw the disciples. And they're still walking around. And yet, I guess I just never had the impression that they would need to be motivated. This is early church stuff. And yet a generation has gone by. And James has to write the global church of his day. And he says, listen, keep focused. Now, this is just my opinion, okay? But in my opinions are really good. I have a unique perspective of the church for almost, I think this year is 20 years. Yeah, this year is 20 years, over 20 years now. I've traveled around the country 48 weeks a year and different church every week. I got a good perspective of, east to west. And it used to be in the beginning, the Midwest was kind of like, the slower paced, things kind of trickle in. But nowadays, it's so consistent across the country. One of the things that I'm seeing incredibly consistently, a lot of Christians I meet aren't bad. They're just distracted. Seriously. I don't hear stories like this much anymore. I don't hear that. And I hear it even less from my generation. That kind of 20 through 40 age group. And it's not that they're, serial killers. Okay? They're not bad. It's just that they're so wrapped up into everything but Him and the kingdom. It's the kingdom takes a back priority. We had a guy in our church, and I love him. He's one of my good friends, and so it makes it really awkward, But we were talking about this project, and he just told me out of the, we were raising money for it. He says, "Man, I don't even tithe." And I was like, "Really?" He's like, "I don't have the money." He's like, I wanted to say, "Dude, you just got back from Disney World." And then he bought that whole hunting get up. We live in Tennessee. They're like, that's the first thing you get out of the womb is a gun and a deer stand. And I mean, seriously, and hey, I'm not against that stuff. Go to Disney World. We love that. But I mean, it tells me what's going on. And are you with me? And so you can't guilt people into that. And it's not that stuff's bad, but that's become the focus of life. And the kingdom church has become a hit and miss kind of stuff. And I don't know if that's exactly what's going on with James and his group, but 20 years after the death of Jesus, James is saying, listen, stay focused. Don't get distracted. And then he follows this up in verse 17 by saying, every good and perfect gift comes from above. And then he clarifies from above with the rest of the verse, which is basically saying that when we say from above, we're not saying thank my lucky stars. Every good and perfect gift comes from him. Now, I had a lady bring this up recently, and I never thought of it this way. She said, well, I thought that meant that everything good in my life is from Jesus. But see, how do you translate good? I won the lottery! I'll leave that to the pastors. But, that's not what he's saying, okay? That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is we only call good that which comes from him. Don't get distracted. See, for the Christian, there's a whole different standard of good that you and I are called to live by. We only call those things good that come from him. I run into this, every camp I'm reminded, I run into this with teenagers. Teenagers. I went to Sky Launch Camp. It's a free Methodist campground this summer, and did their family camp. And I get to meet some of the parents of the junior high kids, which is eye-opening. And they do a junior high camp there. I do that. I've done the junior high camp in the past. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I met this junior high girl, and now she's kind of grown up. And she shows up at camp. And I'm blown away. I mean, she's a grown woman. But she shows up, she's beautiful, and she's, she's there at camp. She says, "Hi, Jeremiah." And she has this, she shows up to service. Because when I first saw her, she had this, it's difficult to describe, she had this parasite stuck to her. This young boy. And wherever she went, the parasite kind of followed her around. And so it didn't take long. We had to talk about the parasite. And so I find some things for the boy to do, and I say, who's this boy you're with? And she's talking about him and all this and all that. He's a great guy, good guy, you'd like him. Is he in love with Jesus? Well, he goes to church. And what I found out, of course, throughout the week, his mom and dad were concerned because he only started going to church in order for them to go out. And I'm sure he was a great guy. Didn't look like a serial killer, In fact, honestly, in talking about it, it's weird because he sat in the services. You'd say, well, you had kind of a bad opinion of him. Well, a little bit. And it wasn't like he was sleeping or wasn't paying attention or, he couldn't keep his hands off of her or it wasn't, none of that. He just sat there like a bump on a log. It's like nothing was, it's like, you know what I'm saying? There was nothing going on in him. It's no response. It was just, and it wasn't that he was bad, but see, how do you define bad? This is what James is saying. Listen, don't get distracted. Well, Jeremiah, it's not bad. How do you define bad? Well, it's a good thing. How do you define good? Going in the ministry is wonderful. If it's God's call in the ministry. If God didn't call you to go in the ministry, it's not good. Going in the military. I get this all the time with young military guys. Going in the military is good. If God's calling you to go in the military. If he's not calling you to go in the military, it's not good. And what James says is, listen, don't get distracted. Don't be led astray. There's a whole new standard of good if you want to be a Christian. There's a whole new standard of good that you're called to live by. And then quickly, I want to give you this standard of good. It gives it to you in verse 18. He gives you 3 things that clarify this standard of good. Okay? I'll read it, we'll walk through it. Verse 18. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all that he created. Here's the standard of good that he's talking about. Don't get distracted. Here's the standard of good. He begins and he says, he chose to give us birth. In the New Testament, there's a few different words. This is really neat. In the New Testament, there's a few different words for chose or choosing. Okay? One word for choose, which is not this word, is the word you might use to describe going to get ice cream. And you're standing behind it. It's so simple when I was younger. I mean, there's like 5. Now there's like 50. It stresses me out. But you choose one. Okay? You stand behind the counter. What do you like? You taste 15, 20. Then you're not hungry. You feel guilty, so you might as well buy something. Take it home. And you choose one. That's one word for choose in the New Testament. Okay? That's not this word. When it says that he chose you, listen to me. When it says that he chose you, he just didn't look down and said, okay, I'll take him. No. This word in the New Testament is translated choose, but it's better translated plan. And it is translated that way in the Old Testament. Greek translation, Septuagint. It's translated plan, which means it's a choosing. It's like what they said about going to Ohio. They chose to go, but there's planning involved with it. That's this term. The perfect illustration of this, I ran into this back when I first got saved. Young Christian, opened the Bible, read it for the first time, and stumbled across the book of Jeremiah, which was incredible because I grew up in a different generation and I hated the name Jeremiah because of a band, a song, they sound. It was terrible. We won't talk about it, but I just didn't. It was a long name and kind of awkward. No one liked it and all that. I didn't like Jeremiah. But I became a Christian and opened up and there's a book under my name on it. I said, wow. And so I began to study Jeremiah. And what I learned is that Jeremiah was a prophet. And when he was called to be a prophet, it's so neat. When he was called to be a prophet, he was a priest in training. Which means he wasn't a full-fledged priest yet. This is so neat. He was a priest in training, which the only way to describe that would be like a freshman religion major at, what's your school here? Mid-America? Mid-America. It's like a freshman religion major at Mid-America. God goes down to Jerusalem to the freshman priest in training dorm and bangs on Jeremiah's dorm. And Jeremiah opens the door and staring face to face with God, and God says, hey, Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, hey, God. And God says, Jeremiah, I'm calling you to be a prophet. And if you go back and read it, Jeremiah is just blown away, scared, he's freaked out, he doesn't know how to respond. I'm too young, and all the language that he uses to describe that. And the reason he's kind of stressed out about it, if you can imagine, God was telling him to go to the leaders of Israel and prophesy to them. Now, I put this in context. This will be like God telling the freshman religion major at Mid-America, go down tomorrow morning to the president's office, and right beside his office is the big boardroom where they're going to be having the regional meeting. Okay? All the district superintendents from that region are going to be there. General superintendent's going to be there. The board of trustees are going to be there, making some significant, decisions and talking about theological. It's a big deal. He said, I want you to go down there, freshman religion major. And I want you to kick open that boardroom door. I want you to walk in that board meeting, jump up on the table. That'll get it. And I want you to look around and say, listen, hey, I've got a word of the Lord for you. What do you think that freshman religion major is going to say? Just what Jeremiah said. I'm not doing it. And you know what God said? Listen, you know what God says to Jeremiah? God looks right at Jeremiah and he says, listen, before you were born, I planned this out for you. I chose you for this. This is a long time coming. This wasn't like God wakes up one day and goes, oh, I forgot all about it. Who do we got down there? Grab Jeremiah, he'll work. No, this was before think about this. You guys, this is your story. And you can do with it whatever you want to do, honestly. I'm at a long end of camp season. You can do whatever you want with this. That happened to me in 1995. And I was a nobody. And it wasn't bells and whistles like that. That's powerful. But God came down in my dorm room as a former Marine living in someone's house and said, Jeremiah, before the foundation of the world, I chose you for this hour. I chose you. He's chosen you. Each and every one of you. And you understand, this is so huge. One of the things we find with like Jeremiah is that this isn't optional. Sometimes we think Christianity is so vague. See, if Jeremiah would have been like, no, I'm not doing it, did something else, well, take an easy one to look at would be Jonah. See, God tells Jonah, go to Nineveh. I chose you to go to Nineveh. If Jonah said, I ain't going to Nineveh, I'm going to Hawaii, which he did. He could have went to Hawaii, started a phenomenal Hawaiian hula hoop surf ministry, won the whole island of Hawaii, and died and went to hell. Because God's call for Jonah wasn't to go to Hawaii. God's call for Jonah was to go to... It's not optional, man. That you were created for this hour. Now, you were not only created, get this, you were not only created for this hour, but he says, listen how specific this is. Verse 18, he chose, he planned to give us birth. That phrase, this is neat. That phrase, to give us birth, is literally translated engendered. So he chose you, and he engendered you for that choosing. You know what engenderment means? We're struggling with this as a country, by the way. We're a little late coming, but other countries have already dealt with this. In fact, I was in California last week. I did there with Steve Scott. I was telling Steve about it. That he said, we've been dealing with this for 20 years. So as I was talking to him, they're very aware of it. But he chose to give us birth, that engendered idea. Engenderment is not talents. You don't grow into engenderment. And by the way, it's not that you shouldn't change your gender. You can't change your gender. Seriously, that's not just, soapbox stuff. You can't change your gender. Now, I know the story, you can cut stuff off and sew stuff on. I get that. But when they open you up, hear me, when they open you up, they're going to find one of two sets of chromosomes. That's it. They're going to find XX or... He created you that way. You're unique. Utterly unique. Get this. He not only called you, but he engendered you for that calling. I tell teenagers this all the time. I'm getting old. Okay? Not as old as Greg Baker, but I'm getting old, okay? I'm getting old. And I still do teen stuff, and it's cool, and we hang out, and it's great, and I like it. But see, God is calling that generation to that generation. See, what was so unique about me and Jeremiah, and this is what was so phenomenal for me, is he planned for me in this hour to use me for this hour and engendered me to do so. I tell teenagers all the time that God chose you from that generation to that generation. Which wouldn't surprise you if I told you that God chose you in your circle of influence, in your job, in your neighborhood, in your environment. He chose you in that environment for that environment. Amen. He engendered you. Another side of engenderment, this is my favorite. I learned this one in kindergarten. My kindergarten teacher told me he told all of us, Mrs. Garinger, so it was a she. But one day she told us all to lift our hands up and look at the ends of our fingers and thumbs. And she says, what do you see? We said, we see squiggly lines. She goes, those are called fingerprints. And this is what she told us. She said, those fingerprints on your hands are not only the only ones that are currently on the face of the planet at this time, but they're the only ones that have ever been and the only ones that ever will be. My iPhone 6 testifies to that. He chose you and he engendered you, which means you can't pawn that off on me. I've got this assumption that I'm applying as a pastor. If God wanted me to reach the people down at your job, He would have given me a job down at your job.
Right.
I wonder if He chose you for that. Seriously. And as an evangelist, this is great because I leave on Sunday. Okay? It's phenomenal. See, I've struggled through the whole pastor comes, pastor doesn't do a good job, pastor leaves. What do you mean he didn't do a good job? Well, the church didn't grow. See, if I was a DS, which is why I'll never be a DS, because they wouldn't tolerate this. When they made the pastor leave, I'd make everybody in the church leave. Because they failed just as bad as he did. I'd walk in on one Sunday morning and say, everybody out. I know that doesn't work. But you understand, it's not your pastor's job to run the community. Win the community. It's his job to equip the saints for ministry. He chose and engendered us. And the last one is that we might be first fruits. That first fruits is not the first fruits in terms of the festivals. It literally means foundation, which is first fruits is not a good translation there. He created you. He chose you. He planned for you and engendered you that you might be the foundation of something He does in His world. I want to ask you something. I just want to throw this out to you. But are you distracted? And honestly, you're the only ones that can answer that question. I can't answer that for you. I live in Nashville area, Tennessee. We moved down from northern Indiana. It's a different world down there. Everyone. Honestly, this is 100% true. The only way you can describe southern hospitality. See, up north, if you go to somebody and say, hey, you want to come to my church on Sunday? They'll just tell you, no, get away from me. Down south, they'll say, sure. And then they won't come. They'll just lie to you. Because everybody down there is so religious. Everyone in my town. We still get into the high schools 3 days a week. Youth pastors come. People say it's a great place to raise your kids. But I get around the area and I'm sensing more religion than I'm sensing madly, passionately in love with Jesus. They're just two different things. And I'm sensing there's people that, I'm a Christian. Where do you go to church? Well, I try to go over there maybe once every other month. And it's not that they're bad or evil. They're wrapped up into everything but the kingdom. And my wife and I are getting to know people in town, and we're, I guess, just hanging around us. We're convicting. I don't know how else to say it. And I'm not super Christian. I'm normal, average, everyday, madly in love with Jesus guy. But man, he's who I live for. He's who I talk about. I ride in my car with him when I'm hydroplaning in pour down rain. I'm just praising while I'm doing it. I drag him into my the evening hours. I go home and go to bed tonight. I'm going to talk with him. I'm going to talk with him as I fall asleep, and I'm involved in kingdom business, and he's sharing me his ideas, and I'm seeing my community through his eyes. And do you have that going on in you? I would assume that all of us in this place go to church somewhere. You just don't come to family camp just for kicks. So I'd assume you go to church somewhere, but are you distracted? And if you are, what are you distracted with? I want to propose to you that it's not the thing you're distracted with that's the problem. It's the person you're distracted from. And if you could just look around at your circumstances, I believe God has chosen you from where you're at to be used where you're at. That He's ordained before the foundation of the world for you to be there. In 1995, I was saved by an aircraft mechanic who hung out with me on the beach once in a while. And God handpicked that guy to be involved in my life. Scott's going to come. We're going to have some worship music, I think. Maybe one or two songs. I've got a great burden in my heart. It's different in the past. I've loved evangelism. I'll still be doing it for the next 10 years. Part-time traveling. But as we sat around last Monday in a staff meeting, we were talking about some different things. We've got no Sunday school teachers. We've got all these kids coming from the community. And no one seems, at least in heart, no one seems to notice. I don't want to say care. I think it's a heart issue. I'll tell you this, I'm not living distracted. I mean, I play my disc golf and I go camping with my kids and, I mean, come on. I do my thing. But I'm not going to live distracted in a day and age when the church needs to be alive and alert and attentive and focused and filled and excited and passionate and used. Because we're living in unprecedented days. And I'm tired. It's been a long drive. I don't have the gumption to get you excited. And I prayed tonight before I got up and I said, Jesus, would your word just go forth and just speak? And I just wonder if there's some here tonight that this so resonates with you. And that resonates with you. And maybe you're sitting there saying, you know what? I think that should be happening to every single one of us. You may not be selling your farm, but I bet you might be going to work different next Monday. And you go to work, you might see that place completely different. And maybe you're not down there for this. But that God has handpicked you to be in that place for such a time as this. Let me pray for you. Jesus, we love you tonight. We thank you for the truth of your word. I heard an old timer this summer at camp pray, God, break our hearts. We sing the song. We sing the song. Break our hearts for what breaks yours. Let us get captured by your perspective. Your heart of love for our communities. Would you distract us, Jesus, from our distractions? I'm so excited. And it is such a pleasure to walk with you in these days for such a time as this. I'm so delighted that you would choose me. That you would handpick me and tailor me. I'm thrilled about my future. I never foresaw that at 42 years old that this new curve would be taking place in my life. And I'm not necessarily overly excited about what I'm doing. I'm just excited that you haven't forgotten me. And that I'm serving a purpose in our kingdom. Would you call us back to that tonight? Would you break our hearts, Jesus? We love you so much. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed. No one's looking around. I want to give you an opportunity to respond. There's no pressure on this. Maybe he's talking with you. Maybe from time to time you're like me when the type A personality kicks in and you just squirrel over here and rabbit over there and so easily distracted. If he's speaking to you tonight, maybe you'd like to get out of your seat and respond and say, Jesus, I'm not bad and I'm not evil. And you know I certainly love you. But you know what? I know I've been distracted. I don't think I've been the wife I'm supposed to be. I don't think I've been the husband I'm supposed to be. I think maybe football's taking a bigger priority. I wonder if my kids' sports program is bigger in my eyes than the kingdom. I give you permission to speak to me tonight, Jesus. God talking to you tonight? Would you like to come and seek with us? We're going to spend some time in prayer. In a couple minutes, I'm going to come and just close us. And we'd love to have you come. What our churches need are not just great preaching and the best worship band and the timely services. And we need a divine movement, heart change of God taking place in our people. I'm telling you, that's what we need. I know it from the top of my head to the tip of my toes. We need a divine revival, inspired revival in the hearts of our people. I want it. I want it in me and my kids and my wife and my family and my church. I want to sink my teeth in Lebanon. If he's speaking to you, let's respond.